That's it.
Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Excellent. So I can share my screen again, can I?
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Oh,
Hey, Tara.
hey, Dennis.
Get rid of that. All right. Okay. Here we go. Got it. Right. Well, thanks everybody for coming along. I have a slight kind of weird announcement. About less than 3 hours ago, I was involved in a 4-car smash on the M50. So I was a bit shaken up, but I don't think there's any major damage. So I thought I'd go ahead anyway. But if this is not as coherent as it should be, then I can blame that. So yeah. So my van shunted into the back of somebody who'd abruptly stopped because he'd hit somebody else or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to try and kind of workshop this because I like to do a short presentation as possible. Everybody okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we can maybe develop things in the Q&A. So you can probably regard these ideas as talking points for later on. So I'll try and get all this done in 20 minutes or so. Although there are 20 slides, but a lot of them just are very quick. So cultural speciesism, because it's Dennis's new phrase that he likes so much. So we thought we'd talk about that. Then animal rights and associated ideas, one of which are being vegan values. So cultural speciesism is very important to me on the grounds that I'm a sociologist. And so I looked in my PhD at the support pillars of this, which are philosophy, theology, and everyday social practice. And so cultural speciesism is a kind of interesting idea. And one of the places I get a lot of work from is this book here by David Nibert, or Nibert, sometimes it's called. And it's called Animal Rights, Human Rights, Entanglements of Oppression and Liberation, as it says on the screen there. And so he lays out how sociologists look at culture and why it's not the same as, say, psychologists. So he starts off by talking about Richard Ryder, who coined the phrase speciesism, Peter Singer, who kind of popularized it, Tom Reagan, Kim Stallwood, who went vegan in 1976, a friend of mine from London, and then Marjorie Spiegel, who has got a controversial book called The Dreaded Comparison. He notes that they're all notable and esteemed kind of academics, but he says that they present an individualistic and psychologically orientated view of oppression. And so he says that essentially what sociologists do is see isms not as embedded in the individual, but a wider part of being embedded into society. And so isms are ideologies, and that's described as a set of socially shared beliefs that legitimate an existing or desired social order. So when we think about speciesism or racism or sexism, for example, we're not talking about a prejudice which is held by individuals as much as something which is embedded into the culture. And I think that one way of thinking about that perhaps is a little bit like if we were fishers and we were in the water, then our culture is all around us. In the same way as cultural speciesism is all around us. You know, we can't escape from it. You watch a movie, you turn on the TV, you watch the news, listen to the radio, and you're going to find something which is speciesist in nature. One of the interesting things about this thing is the kind of easygoing nature of it, in the sense that it's just there all the time, but unquestioned. And that gives it its sociological strengths. in the sense that we don't have to think about it very much. It's just kind of there. A couple of examples I could give you from my own life is I used to be a projectionist in Essex in England, and a guy came over from South Africa, and he was deeply racist as an individual, but he was just reflecting his culture. I don't know whether you know, but the South Africans have got their own version of the N word, and he just called people of color that word kind of automatically. You know, it was just part and parcel of the society in which we are born into and then socialized by. And the same would go in relation to, you know, to cultural speciesism. And another example, which kind of really only vegans kind of get really, is that I once heard on the radio that there was an aid worker who'd been imprisoned somewhere abroad, obviously, and then they were flying back and being interviewed, and they were saying how much that they were looking forward to eggs Benedict when they got home. And from a vegan point of view, you're thinking, well, there you are, you know, you've suffered imprisonment, but you haven't connected the dots to the chickens and therefore the eggs that you're about to kind of consume. And then if we think about cultural speciesism in an economic sense, then we can think in terms of things like subsidies and the related idea that the power relations that go on, for example, the power of the farming lobby. I mean, we know in places like Ireland and in England and places like France, the farming lobby are very powerful, and politicians are often fairly scared of them, and that they have to bring about policies which don't kind of upset the farmers too much because of that power. So these ideas are all kind of swimming around within the idea of cultural speciesism. So that was the first issue that we can use as an example of something to talk about, that we don't think about it as embedded in an individual as much as in society or the social order, those kind of things. And I just got something I've got to admit. There we go. That's one thing there, is that this is a kind of sociological technique, if you like, of sliding from the micro to the macro and back again. And so that's what sociologists tend to do all the time. If there's an individual issue with an individual or say a family, we would then bring it out to the macro. So if you're talking about a situation involving a woman, we might bring it out to the notion of patriarchy and those kind of things. And the idea that things can be institutionalized is very powerful. So if you've got the notion that, say, the police, as it was said in Britain once, that the police was institutionally racist, that's more than saying there's a few racist coppers. It's more than that. It's saying that the actual culture is racist, and therefore that does then obviously, as it were, feed in through socialization, peer groups, etc., into individuals. But the actual power, the base of this idea, the embeddedness is in the structure. Okay, so moving on then to another issue. If I can move this screen, let's see. Oh, there we go. So we're moving towards the idea of the difference between rights and welfare, really. So what I've done here is I've picked out a few entries from a page on Wikipedia called the Timeline for Animal Rights and Animal Welfare. So obviously we've got to acknowledge that Wikipedia is not the best site, but it is heavily referenced, this particular page. And so in that sense, it's not too bad. But there is always that caveat that, you know, when you're dealing with Wikipedia, it's not the greatest. We start off then with, and what I've done is I picked out all the ones that seem relevant to Sentient Rights Ireland and relevant to what happens when people regard other animals as sentient beings, that kind of thing. So Enlightenment philosophers are here arguing that they were sentient beings who deserve protection. And the first modern day laws were passed in Ireland and in Massachusetts. So this book here by an old colleague of mine, Piers Byrne, the first chapter is about this issue. You can see there 1635, which is an act against ploughing by the tail. So it used to be common in Ireland that they would attach a plough not by a kind of harness. They would just attach it to the tail. And one of the reasons for that was that if the blade hit a rock, it was so painful for the horse or another animal that was tethered to stop, and so therefore it would protect the plow. Anyway, so that's one of the first bits. That's not really that relevant to the sentient thing. I just thought I'd throw that in the sense that it's interesting that one of the first acts of animal protection legislation was enacted in Ireland. In fact, Irish individuals have been very kind of influential in terms of the growth of laws, the starting up of organizations, social movement organizations, that kind of thing, throughout history. But certainly in the kind of Victorian age, when the anti-vivisection movements were getting involved, that kind of thing. The one from 1687 is interesting. There was a time when Japan banned the eating of meat, and then it was kind of repealed and then brought back again. And then the bottom one there is Henry Salt. Now, Henry Salt is often regarded as the first animal rights theorist, although it's interesting that he had an argument with Donald Watson from the Vegan Society, and he was arguing for the drinking of cow milk, which is an interesting one from an animal rights point of view. But he's often credited as being the first animal rights scholar, and so in that sense, it would make Tom Regan the most famous one, if you like, but the second wave, if you like. Now, this top one is interesting. Universal Kinship, 1906. So this is J. Howard Moore. And again, we're talking about ethical consideration and treatment for all sentient beings. It's based on Darwinian ideas, which Reagan talked about, the golden rule. And then this idea of sentiocentrism. So that ethical view there that places sentient individuals at the center of moral concerns. Now, this is interesting from an animal rights theory point of view, in the sense that when Reagan comes along in the 80s, he doesn't go for this radical idea. He goes for a more conservative idea, which is called subject of a life. So we might get to talk to that. Where is it? I can just show you that one. I'll probably stop showing you these. I know it's a bit irritating when people do this.
Can I ask you a question before we go on?
Yeah.
Okay, I was just curious about the one about Massachusetts Bay Colony. That was in your first slide. What? Can you just tell us what that was?
It was just it was interesting because it was a time when they were enacting rights for humans, but when they came to consider the other animals involved, then it got translated to welfare. And this is, as you'll see with all of this, and this is a challenge for Sentient Rights Ireland, I believe, is the fact that when sentiency of other animals are concerned, it's automatically translated into animal welfare concerns. And we'll see this time and time and time again. And obviously, that's because the culture, again, understands animal welfare, and it's not good at understanding animal rights as a theoretical position. And so there's always this potential to slide into welfare when you're dealing with other animals. And so we've had it in recent years, a whole series of declarations that other animals are sentient. And they immediately then think of, well, that means that we should be careful about their welfare. Whereas really, if a being is sentient, that implies that that being has rights. And if they have rights, protective rights, moral rights, which would then be codified into law, legal rights, then that would mean the abolition of the use in question. So we'll see this tension all the time when we're going through all of these things, that when it comes to humans, then bad things happening to them will be abolished because they're rights bearers. When it comes to non-humans, the idea is that, yeah, okay, we can see them as sentient beings, but that doesn't automatically mean that they're rights bearers. It means that we should be careful about their welfare. That's what goes on. So we've got animal machines, which kind of really focused on industrial farming or factory farming, and the animal movement has been focused on that ever since. And you can see this issue that I've been highlighting in the sense that there was an outcry following the publication in '64. And so the British Parliament formed the Bramble Committee, which was the first one to kind of look into issues of welfare, sentiency, pain, suffering, and all the rest of it. And they concluded that they came down on the idea of the 5 freedoms, which are just welfare measures. Okay, so once again, the fact that you've got someone exposing animal use in this scenario is not going to translate to animal rights. It's always going to translate to animal welfare. And as I understand it, Sentient Rights Ireland want to do something about that and to try to bolster the idea that sentiency in other animals implies rights, which implies abolition of their use. Whereas at the moment, everything gets translated into welfare. I was talking to Dennis about this a few days ago, and that's going to be a real issue for Sentient Rights Ireland ongoing, not least because that's also the way that the animal protection movement, the so-called animal rights movement, also thinks. They will often slide things into welfare as well as, say, politicians will. So farmers will do it all the time. Oh, well, we look after animals, we love them and all the rest of it. And circus proprietors will do that, even vivisectors will do that. Politicians will do that, and large parts of the animal rights movement will do that as well. So it all slides into welfare. And if Sentient Rights Ireland is going to stand against that, then it's going to be quite a challenge, which is quite interesting. 1975, the publication of Animal Liberation. That's Peter Singer's book. And that's not an animal rights book, but it was seen as a kickstart for what's now called the animal rights movement. A year later, the Animal Liberation Front was formed, 1976. And then we get rights-based animal rights. And this is the Case for Animal Rights by Tom Regan. And this is, it's quite a thick book, 400 pages. And it's quite a dense, closely reasoned argument. Going back to what I said about in relation to the thing about didn't go for sentiency, went for subject of a life. When Reagan was writing, I mean, he started off in the late 70s, and this was published in 1983. He tried to put things quite conservatively. For example, when he talks about subject of a life, which is the criteria for being a rights bearer, he talked about mammals of 1 year and older, and then there was a kind of argument about which individuals, are we talking about mammals, are we talking about fishes, are we talking about birds, and this kind of thing. So he was drawing things quite conservatively. And one of the reasons for that is I think he wanted to move the argument on and not just get it bogged down in the fundamentals at the beginning. And so I think he drew things quite conservative compared with other people. And what people like Singer did and Ryder is they went for sentiency rather than subject of a life, which is seen as a bit more powerful in a way. And then when you get to the 90s here, Animal Property and the Law, that's a very important book for Sentient Rights Ireland. That's Gary Francione, his first book. So he looks at the property status of other animals and how that is a problem for them, in the sense that if they're items of property and they're up against, as it were, in court, for example, the property owner, there's a complete power imbalance. Then Rain Without Thunder, this is 96, that really he starts to complain now about the fact that the animal welfare movement is really an animal, the other way around, the animal rights movement is really an animal welfare movement. And that is dragging back the idea of putting together a rights-based position. So Reagan tried it in the 80s. It kind of worked for a couple of years, especially in the States. Never really took on in Britain or elsewhere, but in the States it did for a while, and kind of culminated in 1990 when there was a march for animals at Washington, and the highest estimate is about 90,000 people at that march. And so it was a big do at the time, but then everything started to crumble in terms of animal rights, and it all kind of faded away into animal welfare, as it normally does. And that's kind of my kind of suggestion, that it's going to happen all the time. So you're going to have to be careful about that. So this is picking out those things with regard to Sentient Beings. Starts off in 97. I think, ironically, Compassionable Farming had a big deal with this, I think, obviously a welfare group. And again, sentient beings, not just merely property. And again, and I think that Dennis can speak to this probably even more than I can, is that when it was translated into law.
No, I can't get it anyway. I don't know.
Okay, should I carry on? When it was translated into law, it became an issue again of welfare, and they brought in the idea of cultural.
Well, I don't want you sitting here if I get up.
Do you want me to get it?
Hey Bernie, why don't you mute your mic, Bernie? And then we've got a lot of things going on in 2021, and it's all related to sentient beings. And I think in terms of this group, you're all completely up to speed with all of that. Then the final one is the idea that other animals are recognized as interested persons. This is to do with, what's his name, Pablo Escobar, and something to do with hippopotamuses who were threatened with being killed. And so they were, I think, in Colombia, where they already had legal standing, and then there was something to do with the North American courts, and they had to establish that other animals could be interested persons in law. Okay, so I'm not great on legal rights. You need somebody like Steve Wise for that.
Yeah, I don't know where your sound is on that
the
one.
case for animal rights is based on moral rights. Yeah, so you know Reagan would
Take it here.
moral rights.
No,
And the difference there is that
Oh,
you shared
the
with
idea of
Roger-
moral
Roger
rights.
shown this, obviously.
the other animals have them already. You all right there, Bernie?
Okay.
Wait.
Sorry, touch it.
Ah,
Okay, let's
Alrighty.
move on.
Hi, Bernie.
Okay, so
Mute
I
me,
just got a
no.
couple of slides from Tom Reagan here.
Mute, stop video, participants chat,
That's you.
And
share
so
screen,
he's-
record
he's-
reactions on.
He's talking really, this is kind of really one of his planks.
It
of
must
the
be
idea
here,
of
it must be.
subject of a life, yeah.
Hi,
Other
I'm
animals are in the
Karen.
world, they're aware of the world, they're aware what happens to them, and what happens to them matters to them.
every time.
This was a slogan that Reagan said over and over again. It's quite a powerful one. And then the last one on this one would be that Reagan was warned, this is from 1983, the case, that to be for other animals doesn't mean that you're against humanity. And this little thing at the bottom, the animal rights movement is part of, not opposed to, the human rights movement. We at VIP, we've got a big banner that says that. Okay, how are we doing for time?
Okay, where's
Yeah, not too bad, I suppose.
Good.
Roger.
Okay, so let's just have a look at some vegan values, as I've called it. And the vegan society, or the vegan social movement, was formed in 1944. Now that's a controversial thing, in the sense that a lot of people are suggesting that there were vegans before the vegan society, and that there might have even been people who came together in an organized way to campaign for things like veganism, or what became called veganism. But when I do talks, I always point out that I'm talking about the people who came together in a kind of collective way to form the vegan social movement, and that took place in 1944. And as you can see there, in terms of the
Sorry,
No.
Roger, would you mind muting everybody so we can hear you
Yeah, that's
properly?
a good idea.
Yes, you have control of the screen, Roger.
well, let me see if I can go down there. Oh yeah, I can.
Good idea. Okay.
Okay, there's two Bernies. Right, I think that might.
God, one's bad enough. I'm not joking.
I think that might do. I think most of it was coming from Bernie, I think. So
Mute myself now.
so 1944, obviously we talk about the last years of the Second World War, and in the end the vegans were trying to work out why humanity had become so violent. They just had two global conflicts in fairly rapid succession. And they thought that something had happened to humanity that put them into a new form of barbarity, which might seem a bit hyperbolic, perhaps, but I think that you've got to remember, these are the people who are learning about the concentration camps kind of fresh off the page, as it were, and fresh over the radio. And I think it must have been quite a shock to their system. I mean, we look upon it as a kind of historical thing now, but in terms of them, it really was something that they were learning for the first time. And so the actual horror of the Holocaust really struck them, and they set about trying to work out what to do. First of all, they declared peace. They saw veganism as part of the peace movement, and then they thought that veganism was about issues like justice, non-violence. And I tend to sum it up there with a bit of veganism was like a justice for all movement, because they talked about injustice in a general sense. So the focus and scope. The focus of veganism has always been about human relationships with other animals, but the scope has always been wider, and they talked about the benefit that humans would get from bringing about a vegan world. Not least this bit that I've pulled out in large print. They believe that veganism was part and parcel of the moral evolution of humanity, and that we would then start to climb back out of this pit of despair or whatever. Some of their language, as we'll see, is a bit dramatic. And in terms of language, they are a product of their time. So they do say man rather than humanity, that kind of thing. So there is that kind of issue about the way that they speak. Okay, the vegan movement was, if you look back at the history of the movement, it can seem very male dominated, but there's a lot of very powerful women involved at the start of the vegan social movement. Elsie Shrigley, sometimes called Sally Shrigley. You got Dot Watson, who used to be called Dorothy Morgan, and obviously married Donald Watson. Kathleen Janaway and Eva Batt. I've included this one because I thought you might like to see. This is Kathleen Janaway, and she's formed a group called Movement for Compassionate Living. But it says here is really quite interesting. Change will only come when we get the masses of people changing. The politicians will go on until they are frightened of losing the votes, and the industrialists will be the same. So I thought, given the fact that you're probably going to be in line to talk to TDs eventually, I thought that would be an interesting thing, because people tend to see politicians as leaders, whereas really they're followers. They follow the money and they follow the votes, which essentially is what Kathleen Janaway is saying there in that. And then these are just summaries, just to end, just to give us a couple more talking points, if you like. This is Kath Clements, who did a summary of veganism, and it says 1995 there, but the actual first edition of this book came out in 1985. So veganism is about having a consistent approach to human rights and animal rights, ecology, and world food problems. In terms of the modern vegan social movement, and I'm sure that many of you will know this is not a popular stance. A lot of people want veganism to mean it's about other animals only, whereas the people who started our movement didn't think of it that way at all. And you can see that over and over again in what they say. This one, for example, this is 64 by now. Eva Batt was an officer of the Vegan Society, and she wrote a couple of best-selling vegan cookery books. But she also wrote a pamphlet, and she said, veganism is one thing and one thing over, only a way of living which avoids exploitation, whether it be of our fellow men, again, the sex language of the time, the animal population, or the soil upon which we rely for our very existence. I always tend to comment, it's interesting that they thought that the soil could be exploited, but really they meant depleted by this, I think. There's a famous book from the 80s by John Robbins called Diet for a New America. And he talks about the fact that our topsoil situation is almost like a crisis situation at the moment. Now, this is the year after the formation of the vegan social movement, and this is the best known co-founder of the vegan movement, Donald Watson. The object of the Vegan Society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life. Personally, I tend to think that this is a better definition of veganism than the actual current official definition, which started about 1979, and by the time we got to 1988, it was in place. That's the one that talks about practicable and possible, those kind of things. But I just like this because it's nice and succinct, and it just kind of gets to the point, really. Okay, I'm not going to read these out, but I'm just going to pick out a couple of issues from it. This one here is Watson claims that if vegan values came about, it would represent the greatest peaceful revolution ever known to humanity. And again, this kind of interlinking of issues in the better interest of men and animals alike. You'll see this, I'm coming to the end now, you'll see this being kind of rehearsed over and over again, this same kind of point. This one here, this is Jack Sanderson talking in '65 about Donald Watson. And he says, erase from the face of the earth all the wrong exploitation of the collective life on earth, that of the creatures and the plants, and that of man. So again, all this kind of interlinking of ideas. This is Leslie Cross, who probably could be credited for bringing about the evolution of vegan philosophy. He started writing about 1949, and he finished it about 1955. And so he kind of talks about what veganism means. He talks about the obvious changes that veganism will bring. No butcher's shops. The milkman, of course, in those days, if he still goes on his ride, will be delivering vegan milk. And so that's quite an interesting thing to be thinking about in the 1950s. The countryside will not be heavy with the anguish of cows crying for the calves, which is a very modern sounding kind of claim from vegans. There will be no slaughterhouses, no vivisection laboratories, and no one will hunt animals for fun. And then he says some of the changes are not so obvious. And those, again, are the ones which are knock-on benefit for humanity. So they essentially had the position that animal liberation was our liberation, that if we emancipate other animals, we would get huge benefits, not least going back to that idea that in moral terms, we would evolve back into much more kind of moral beings. In a vegan world, as they saw it, we would be much less violent, if not, best of all, non-violent, but we would be much less violent as an entire species. That's how they saw it. This is where Cross is saying, this is 51, that veganism is not so much welfare as liberation for the creatures and the mind and heart of humanity. So again, all those kind of issues are kind of coming back over and over again. And then because he would free himself from many of the demands made from his lower nature, so that's a real kind of product of its time. We wouldn't talk about lower nature of humanity nowadays so much, but the benefit to man himself would be incalculable. And so this is the benefit of a vegan world to humanity. So those kind of ideas. And this is the final one, which is, this is a sociologist friend. And this guy actually is one of a team who are looking at the Donald Watson archive. They've had permission to look at Donald Watson's papers and everything. And he's called Matthew Cole. And in 2014, he wrote a chapter in this book about critical animal studies. And he says the vegan aim, or the object of veganism, combines passionate non-exploitation of other animals with an emancipated vegan self and a more compassionate human society. Vegan ethics from the beginning was directed towards these interconnected goals of transforming human beings and transforming human society, with both flowing from the foundational reconfiguration of human, non-human, animal relations. Sorry if that's a bit wordy, but Matthew is a sociologist, so we often do that as sociologists. So that's that. I sometimes start to answer my own questions, but we'll leave that from here. I think I'll stop sharing, and we can maybe have a talk about these issues.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, indeed, of course.
Okay.
That's what it's all about.
Okay. Now, what I was thinking about, or I'm not quite sure how it all fits in, but the whole idea of of animal liberation and the same thing for people is it seems particularly current in terms of like the whole thing with the virus, the whole pandemic, about how probably they all started in the Chinese meat markets or some places like that where animals are treated horribly, and then it transfer the virus switches to people. But I've read several articles, mostly in the Guardian, about like if people figured that out and we started to like not do terrible things like boil animals to death, and that it would be our self-preservation. So it's not just like it's like a quid pro quo almost, that we would be better, we would not be doing horrible things to animals, but on the other hand we wouldn't be creating our own destruction either. It's sort of hard to get that across to people.
Yeah, but essentially that's what the pioneers of the movement talked about, that our liberation or their liberation was our liberation, and that's what you're saying. I mean, we are talking about a zoonotic disease when we're thinking about the pandemic, and there's been a whole series of them. There are predictions to have worse to come, and mainly it's because we keep messing with other animals.
And factory farming and all of that.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're obviously, I mean, there are a few theories about how COVID-19 came into being, but scientific consensus seems to be that it was a zoonotic disease, and it seems to be the wet markets of China and all that. And then it quickly moved into things like mink farming, especially in Germany. And that's a situation where it was transferring backwards and forwards from humans to other animals, mutating as it did. And now, of course, we've got all these variants. And again, I mean, I agree with you. We're not learning our lesson. But if
we're not.
Still ourselves in,
Well, how? I mean, I'm just curious. Do you have any ideas, suggestions on how to get that across to people? I mean, it's sort of like there's this whole denial. Like today, like in Boston, people are just taking their masks off. Everything's dandy. Everything is not dandy. It's not at all. So I always go back to what someone told me once: the denial is the least effective defense mechanism, and it's true. But how do you get around? I mean, how do you get around that?
Well, it's very difficult because, I mean, obviously this is a very big question. Tom Reagan would say that's a very difficult question because and I mean, we are talking about, really, we're looking at the conservatism of humanity now. And one of the things that we know as sociologists that we're most conservative about is our diet. It's one of the things that each culture tends to have a few foods. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of edible plants, and yet there's a few foods that each, so we're deeply conservative when it comes to food, and we're deeply conservative to things like change, and so that's one of the main problems, that, people don't want to change. And one of the main narratives of the entire pandemic is that people, right from the start, wanted to get back to normal.
Right.
But normal is violent. So we don't want to get back to normal. We want to get back to better than normal.
Yeah, we do. Some of us do. Yeah. Okie doke.
But actually, how to do it, Louise, I don't know.
Well, I know. I don't either. But it's really frustrating because it just seems like, because it's so stupid. I mean, it's just like we're just doing the same thing over and over. It's the same thing with, that we're making all of these terrible weapons, and some of the Raytheon people like that are making $1 zillion off the war in Ukraine, but there it goes. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Again, we're part of the peace movement, but I mean, it's often been said, isn't it, that if worldwide the arms trade stopped for a couple of days, we could feed everybody. We're talking about huge amounts of money and resources. I mean, just think of the environmental damage that has been
awful. And Yemen, let's not forget.
Yeah, Yemen, of course, we've got the more controversial Israeli-Palestinian issue as well.
That one too, yes. Yeah. Yuck.
Maybe we ought to go around the panel and say, how do we solve this massive cultural and political problem?
And what would the prize be? Well,
Right, Dennis, you've got your hand up, I believe. And you're muted. Is that my fault?
I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
Okay, just thinking about what you were saying, Roger, and thank you very much for the talk this evening. It was excellent. I really enjoyed it. Now, I had two conversations with two people today, and the one thing they both said to me, which was I found pretty profound. They reckoned, we're talking about the Irish context here now, that we have momentum. And I was trying to work out what, you know, in the conversations, how did they come about that? And then I was when you were speaking, it was coming to me because you talked first about welfare and then you talked about animal rights. And then we went into vegan. So with that march in New York in the 90,000, that was the height of animal rights, we'll say. But what has happened since, and we know this in the Irish context, is the amount of people who have gone vegan. Now we can talk whether it's ethical vegan or plant-based or what have you, but in 2018, Ford Bia assessed the population of Ireland as being 4.3% of the whole population as being vegan in some way or other, or vegetarian.
Right. It was quite high relative, wasn't it? Yes.
Yes. So I think if we put animal rights and the quest for animal rights and the vegan population together, I think that is the momentum. There is the people are there. They're in the population centres, Dublin, Cork, Galway. They're there. I mean, we look around, go back 5 years ago, if I was to go to Dunn's or any of the big supermarkets, there wasn't a range of vegan products. Now, an apple is vegan, we all know that, or a banana, that sort of thing. But the amount of products that is in there now for a vegan to buy in all the supermarkets tells me somebody is buying those. I mean, Dunn's stores are stocking Engevita. One time, the only place you could get that in Galway was Evergreen, then Holland and Barrett started it, and now Dunn's have it, and other places have it. I've even seen it in Aldi. So there is a populism coming, and I'm not sure where I got this figure from, but 3.5% of the population is enough to bring around a change in society. This is my point. And if in 2018, if we were at 4.3, because it has to have gone up since, I think this is momentum, and I think we have a chance to make a difference now. It's not just in the short term and get some welfare gains. I think we can make some inroads in rights. And personally, from where we're coming from, we have 2 years at least to the next election. We have loads of time to get organised and put in a good fight and make a good case and get all those new words that we've got from you, like culture, speciesism, get all those into the conversation, the national dialogue on the airwaves, TV, in the print media, on social media, and get people using those words as opposed to us banging on every day about cruelty and this awful and that's awful. And I think the other thing that you were saying about in the vegans were talking about the soil and all that. We have this now with climate, that we have a third reason, and as yourself and Louise were talking, health as well. There are so many pillars now to build all this on, and plus the increase in the vegan population. I think there is definitely a chance that we could have an amount of success that would be tangible. That's how I feel at the moment.
Mm. Well,
and it is global too. I mean, it definitely is. You know, it's in Ireland, but it's also everywhere.
Yeah, it's mondial. It's all over. And it's you know, I believe that the vegan movement has at least an element of compassion in each person that has gone vegan, whether it be compassion for their own individual health or their family's health or animals or sentient beings or the planet. You know, there's a huge amount of people that will think about compassion when they think about veganism. And I think for you know, I think we need to start throwing some compassion to the farmers, to the people that do exploit animals and have been brought up to accept that as something that's normal, you know, and in their own lives, they're broken beings. They're you know, they're masking, they're going through pressure from departments of agricultures to produce and to create more produce in forms of animals and stuff. And I think the suicide rate in farmers, as well as doctors, as well as vets, is just humongous. You know, it's way out there. And you know, I've spoken to a lot of farmers in my life. I've grown up in the country and blah de da. You know, I've done activism outside meat factories and blah de da. And I've always asked them what was the first animal and what was the first memory that they ever had, and you would see their faces light up, and it was beautiful, you know. And they'd tell me about the puppy or the kitten or the hen, or you know, and then I'd ask them what their last memory was, and their faces would just drop, you know. So I think there's a huge outreach needed to be done to help farmers transition, you know, into growth and stuff.
Yeah, well, obviously, one thing we know about farmers is that they're heavily subsidized. And so if we were to learn about the subsidy system, that would go a long way to be able to think about that transition idea, because that's very important. Because I've had conversations with farmers on the street, and when you say, well, you know, what vegans were hoping to do is, you know, transform you into plant farmers, and then quite often they will listen to you. Going back to Dennis and the points you made on those, well, first of all, momentum, the real issue about momentum is whether you can sustain it or not. So that's one thing. And then in terms of those numbers, that they're contested, those, in the sense that it's often said that if you've got people with an unshakable belief and they hold to a say, for example, that vegan animal rights is a thing, kind of thing, as it were. But the numbers are contested. So some people say 10%, other people say 20, 25. So I would say that the 3.5 that you mentioned, Dennis, is quite low in that general discourse. But I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I hope it's right, but I don't know whether most people would agree with that low number, you know.
Okay, thank you, Roger.
Yeah, no, loads of great points there from everybody. Carol, were you saying something?
Maria Fahy, who isn't on tonight, she had a very good idea. Her idea, Dennis, I think if we can actually get around to doing this, is to educate children with leaflets at schools, pick a few towns and schools and get started that way, either with the juniors or the transition years. And education, I think, is the way to go.
Education. It's very important. But Bernie and I have a group called, what's it called, Bernie? I can never remember it. Animal Education Outreach. It's getting access to the schools, which are the problem there. And all the groups, even the established ones who have done school outreach for years and years, like Animal Aid in Britain, for example, they have difficulty. I remember talking to Animal Aid a few years ago when I was part of Vegan Ireland, and they were saying, well, really, the issue is access. And then you've got the issue of, you've got to have age-appropriate materials, those kind of things. But access is the big one, because they're kind of in place of the parent, you know, what's it called? Parental, I can't remember the name of it now.
Parental consent.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and so they have to be very careful that they're not going to do anything that's going to upset their own things, and especially if they've. I mean, Animal Aid said that they've had situations where the kids have run back to their parents and said, right, I'm a vegan now, And then the parents go back to school and complain.
What?
Yeah.
I just say one little thing. Okay.
Yeah,
No,
definitely.
I was just thinking about that sometimes it seems as though like just even one product is in introducing that to people, like oat milk is really taking off over here. So you sort of work it with something that actually people discover they like, and that they like it because it's, especially, it tastes good, and it's, you know, it doesn't hurt cows. But it just seems like just an inroad with something like that is ammunition. Works.
I'd love someone to develop, you know, say, you know how everything is so visual at the moment, you know, children are so, you know, stuck in their screens and stuff. I'd love someone to develop a DVD that would be family friendly, that could be watched and accessed, you know, accessed through so many different avenues cheaply, just explaining, you know, the land and the change of land, and through farming, and you know, people, well, there's so many things that could be put on a, you know, a half-hour DVD that you get in for a $5 in a store, you know. If someone would jump on that, would be great.
Do
You know.
people still buy DVDs? I don't know.
Well, or something to download, you know, there.
Oh,
Yeah.
fine. But you talked about that in that loan, Tara.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember I sent, I was traveling to hospital one day and I decided that Noel Fitzpatrick was going to be the receiver of my email. And I had like 3 hours to travel, so it was quite a lengthy email making suggestions on how you know, Ireland could do with his influence in helping animals and helping people understand about the land, and how farmers are exploited also by the departments. You know, you were chatting there, Roger, about, you know, farmers getting subsidies. It'd be fantastic if you know, we could start programs heading towards subsidies that will allow farmers to grow crops on their individual terrains, you know. And
so the new technology, things like vertical farming, we need to know more about that kind of thing, because farmers will often say that their land is too poor to grow anything, which is actually not true, in the sense that Movement for Compassionate Living said it years and years ago, that nut trees, for example, will grow anywhere, you know, hemp as well. And in fact, if you Google it, if you do a kind of Google Images thing, you can see trees growing out of rocks. You know, you've got a kind of little abandoned kind of island somewhere, and you've got a little kind of forest on it because they've been left alone. And so trees are very tenacious, you know, so trees will grow anywhere. But the new technology of vertical farming, I think, is very interesting, in the sense that one issue that vegans need to at least address, or at least think about, is the issue of crop deaths. And so that would eliminate those. And it seems to me that could be the future, certainly from a vegan point of view.
And vertical farming, I'm not aware of it.
Well, it's just a way of kind of, you know, it's a totally controlled situation where you might, it's kind of like a farm inside a building, which is totally controlled by things like lights and computers and stuff. But you can also do that small scale. I have them. There's a lot of these containers that you put on the backs of ships that you've got a little farm inside, and they've even experimented on having a vegetable farm which is attached to a restaurant. And so it's kind of growing up the wall on a restaurant, as it were. And so when you order your food, the chef goes out and harvests the vegetables and goes and cooks them,
That's right.
which is a real good thing. Going back to DVDs, there is one. It doesn't really fit all the criteria that you mentioned, but there is one called Stimulus Response, and that's quite interesting. I think it might still be on YouTube, and that talks about the capacities of other animals and talks about it really kind of establishes that they're sentient beings, but also problem solvers, that kind of stuff. And so it's based on animal experiments, but not the invasive ones. It's kind of observation of other animals, that kind of thing. You know, like how does a chicken work their way through a obstacle course, that kind of thing. You know.
Okay, I'll have a look at that. Great. Does anybody remember something on YouTube that spoke? It was English based, and they spoke about the fact that with sheep farming and cow, cow farming, etc., throughout the years, how nature has changed so much due to all of that. Does anyone has anyone seen a movie like that? Not a movie, a documentary. No, I must look up, find it. I'll let you know.
I think there's quite a lot of stuff about the kind of agricultural revolution, if that's what you talk about.
It was one in particular in England. I'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Quinoa is taken off in England. Sorry, I'll unmute myself.
You're muted, Bernie.
No, it's me. Sorry.
I can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Quinoa is taken off in Shropshire, and I'm just wondering. Also, the lack of land could be addressed by growing crops hydroponically.
Yes, aeroponics, hydroponics, they're all really interesting technologies, I think. I mean, you can almost have a garden in your house in that sense, or in a garage or a shed, those kind of things. And because you don't need soil to grow plants, you just need nutrients to be sprayed on them. Soil really is the anchor, so they don't move.
Just an aside there on soil and the veganic farming method. We have an inquiry in with a veganic farmer in Tinnahealy in Ireland, and they haven't responded yet, but we're hoping they'll come on and do a webinar or something like tonight and give us the lowdown on what it is about veganic farming and veganic market gardening, everything from a big commercial operation to somebody just doing something on their patio. So we're waiting for a response from them. So we will know about it, and we know about soil, and we get it from them. So
that sounds good. Especially they might be able to clarify, because it changes from country to country, but organic is often not vegan friendly, in the sense that you talk about fish blood or fish meal, blood and bone meal being used, and so depending on the country, you've got a problem with organic, and yet it tends to obviously be pesticide free and all that, which again is a major kind of problem in the sense that we're killing so many other animals to produce crops. So that's a vegan issue, really.
Brilliant. Bernie, are you off mute yet? Hello.
I can only see some of the screen. It's kind of been funny. No, it was just a remark I was making there to Tara. You mentioned the vet, Patrick. He approves of greyhound racing, so I don't think he's on our side.
I hear you.
Tackled him about it, and he didn't deny it.
Oh dear.
I think we need to get the adults before we get the kids, because in the situation with the schools, when we tried to get into the schools, we were okay where the schools knew us. They knew we were okay, But the ones that didn't know us didn't really want us. That's the problem we had if we wanted to get around schools. Like Roger, we've all the material and everything. And we did a few, and we did some scout places, didn't we?
Hmm.
And they went quite well. And
We
they said, we'll have you back and all the rest. But
Yeah, we did a few ones to very young children, you know, 5s and 6s, and of course then you've got to be very careful about what you say, and you know, in terms of things like graphic materials or graphic details of animal use, you know, you can't be showing them earthlings, put it that way, you know. So
Of course. What was the Bramble Committee, Roger? Do you mind?
it was a government committee in 65, I think it was, in England, and they were basically reacting to Ruth Harris's book, and it was one of the first inquiries into what they call animal welfare. But I think they looked at, you know, who animals were really in terms of, are they sentient, do they feel, and that kind of stuff. They did make a comment. I think I've got it as a meme somewhere on the VIP page. They did make a comment about the anguish of separating calves from cows, and again, it's really quite interesting in the sense that again, we tend to think, oh, these are things that are claims that modern day vegans make, but it goes back forever. In fact, let me just get this up and I'll read it to you. It's incredible. This is from the Vegan News, number 3, 1945. And it says, a telepathic communication from a cow. You kidnap my children, steal my milk, kill me and eat me, and then strut about in my hide. So that's, again, a very kind of modern sounding kind of accusation, as it were. But they talked about that quite a lot on the grounds that the vegans were trying initially to have a non-dairy section of the Vegetarian Society. So they were all kind of non-dairy vegetarians. That's how they describe themselves. And the vegetarians told them that they didn't want to have such a section. And I always say they did the vegans a great favor, because they basically said, look, don't come in with us, strike out on your own. And that's what the vegans did. And then 10 years later, we had vegan philosophy, which was much more radical, a revolutionary idea compared with vegetarianism, for example. And so by that kind of, if you like, polite refusal from the vegetarians, it did veganism a lot of favors, I think.
Onwards and upwards.
The momentum.
They've been at it for quite a while, you know, Christ.
Well, I like the optimism in this group. I mean, Dennis is Mr. Optimist, isn't he?
Glass half full.
Yes, of course. Yes, why not?
well, I think we have to be at this so long, you know.
Yeah, glass is
We have
getting
to be optimistic.
Yeah.
It's the people we're meeting. It's the good people we're meeting. The subject matter obviously is terrible. We know that. But what I find and what gives me great energy and strength and the synergy is the good people I bump into every day and every other day and every week. And a lot of you are around here tonight. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, on that, and I think Bernie would probably disagree with me on this, as she often does.
Oh, I'm afraid to hear this.
One thing that has changed in the movement is that we stopped, or at least a lot of us stopped looking for enemies to fight, and we started to look for people to educate. And I always say, in fact, Bernie, you'll remember me saying this years ago to you, do you think there are any ethical vegans out there that we don't know? And you said yes. And I said, well, in that case, we need to find them, because that is the thing that ultimately will create the fundamental change. Of course, if it proves that we exhaust that seam, if you like, and there's not enough of them, then we've got a problem. But hopefully there will be enough, going back to what Dennis was saying about the figures and everything. If we can get to the 10%, then we can then start to change the culture, because we do have that momentum. And so I always think the best thing to do is, if we assume there's ethical vegans out there, let's go find them.
Yeah, and then they'll be more created as well. It's not like it's a static kind of thing. I mean, I think that
Yeah.
more and more people are coming around. So yeah, no, it's
Really, everywhere you go, you find people that just pop up and say, "Oh, I'm vegan." Who said vegan? You know. Oh, what more can you ask for? But what do we do with them? How do we get them together? We need them to be activists too.
well,
That actually is really interesting, Bernie, because there was, if people look at Vegans of Ireland, and I don't know whether people are members of that, somebody was saying, is it just me, but whenever I post anything about veganism, I don't get any likes, and sometimes I get told off and everything. And there was a big thread that followed. And these modern day vegans were very kind of timid. They were frightened to talk about veganism because in case their friends unfriended them or their family had a bit of a go at them and everything. And I was talking to somebody today and they said, well, these people, they don't seem to be the kind of people who would become activists, but they are vegan. And so there is this ideological conflict really about, do we create activists who become vegan, or do we create vegans who we hope will become activists? And so if you think about it, you might have some activists who don't become vegan. There's one thing, but then you've got some vegans who don't become activists, but at least they're vegan, and that's doing in its own right. But the ideal situation is to try and convince them to take up some form of activism, even if it's just door dropping or leafleting, writing to your paper, whatever, those kind of things. Because an active vegan, I mean, Ronnie Lee talks about this. He said, first go vegan, then get active, and then become an organizer, because we need more organizers as much as anything else.
Well, they're also models of behavior in their own behavior every day, which is
activism as well.
Lead by example.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Well, I think one of the things we should look at, and when I first heard the idea, I didn't think it was great. It's just if set up a circle of people and go for a meal together. That could be the activity and the talk around it. I think, Marie, you were talking about that last year. If you're still here, are you, Marie?
I am. I'm here.
Yeah, I think that's something we should explore in the local sense, the Connacht sense. Going to Westport, maybe put an ad down there. We're meeting up. Any other vegans in the area? Would you like to call up and see us?
Exactly.
1 to 2 and book the restaurant.
I mean, we've all got to go to the States to have a meal with Louise. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, let's do that too.
Okay, we're packed.
Right, and let's have Louise come over, and then we can have meals there too.
When are you coming over, Louise?
Well,
Exactly.
I'm working on it. I have to do like a couple different things all at the same time, so I'm trying to get them coincided. But no, it's definitely in the works. It'll definitely be not long. No, got to do it.
I thought it was April. I thought you said April.
Well, it was, but that was then I was going to come over with those the Veterans for Peace from over here were having their trial because of what happened at Shannon Airport a long time ago. Anyway, that isn't happening. So I gotta I gotta put it all together. But it'll happen.
I hope you're going to row over so you don't have to go on an aeroplane.
As long as you drive, Louise.
Sure. That'd be great. Wow.
There's a story behind that, but I won't go there.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we need to work on the word veganism. It seems to be a bad word in many places these days. I see a lot of threads where vegans are talking to other vegans in derogatory terms, and there's something has to change in that respect, I believe. You get these kind of high and mighty vegans that are forgetting the kind of compassionate terms that surround the word, you know. So I don't know, I tend to leave the word vegan out of most things these days.
Vegans just being vegans would bring up the subjects, just being themselves, but not go with lecturing about it. Just talk about it, you know.
Yeah, it's I suppose getting the word out there, what veganism encompasses, you know, I think would be interesting, especially with the way Roger has mentioned so many different, you know, dates and you know, from 1635, 1638, 1944, 1976, you know, the ages of veganism, you know, it would be nice to I think Dennis and Carol, would be nice, and Marie and everybody, Ted, to put up you know, something on veganism regarding the particular dates and stuff, and let people see what vegans have thought about in 1944 or 1975 and stuff. And I think people think that veganism is something that's just been kind of created in the past 20 years. You know, so yeah, I'm excited to look into you know, doing posts regarding the references you made there, Roger. That's great.
And if anybody wants a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm quite happy to send it to them.
Me.
Yeah.
Are we putting it around?
I get it on minutes. Right, I kind of have to go, guys, because I'm losing light and I've got some dogs to bring in.
Supposed to go over.
Okay, Carol, good to see you. You're looking great.
Oh, thank you. It was great being here, and thanks very much, Roger. That was very interesting. Also, thank you.
How'd you measure, Tara?
I'm surprised that I made any sense today, to be honest, after my experience, but there you go.
I know.
Well done. Well
I
done.
won't say anything, Roger.
I'll call you, Bernie.
Definitely, okay. She's
I
gone.
will.
I'll call you, Bernie, as well.
Okay, all right. You come up in the other corner.
Don't call me Bernie.
Oh.
Let's call everybody Bernie.
All right.
I'll talk to you later, Louise. I have to go
Wait,
try and
yes,
find some
yes.
foxes now. That's where that's how I forgot about tonight. Yeah, okay.
Goodness.
I have to go. I'll tell you all later, okay?
All right, for sure.
Roger knows where I'm going.
Should I stop the recording now that we're making
Yes,
social
yes,
plans?
please.
Yeah, we'll let